Welcome to the weekly Wednesday webinars. This week is measuring a portfolio's impact, which is also known as how to add the impact of a solar panel to the impact of a chicken. Or I like to think of it as how to add a solar panel to a chicken. My name's Looney Libis, and these webinar series are brought to you by Fletch, the Conscious Company Accelerator, and Aviary, a new seed fund for impact. A little bit about me before we get into the content. So I am a serial entrepreneur. I've been doing startups for 25 years. Started in the tech world, started in the standard story of two guys have an idea, find some money from angels and then VCs, make it big, sell it off, all that standard stuff you read about in the news. And then my big breakthrough was back in 2011. I discovered a business school on my home island of Bainbridge Island. It was at the time called Bainbridge Graduate Institute. It was later renamed to Pinchot University. And this is the first business school in the world to teach business, or to teach how to do good in the world by doing business instead of doing nonprofit work, instead of just giving away money. And I volunteered there for many months and then eventually became a faculty member. I've been teaching there for 4 years. In learning this method and learning this style of business, my next gig turned out to be Fletch. Fletch is that Conscious Company Accelerator. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then this year, I'm spinning up a seed fund with a partner, Matt, who's on this call. And a seed fund is early stage capital for these kind of companies that do good by doing business, companies from around the world. And if you want to see what those are like, you can come to the Fledge website, click on Fledglings, and see their talks. We have hours and hours of talks of these companies. All right, so this idea was inspired in December of 2014, talking to Gifford Pinchot III, the founder of Pinchot University. And therefore, it's named after him. So it's the Pinchot Impact Index. And it goes something like this. So there's a problem in the world of impact, which is we have a hard time measuring it. And you'll find this out if you're new to the space or if you've been in the space a long time. When you go to events, one of the biggest questions that gets asked over and over again is, how do you measure impact? How do you measure deforestation and access to energy and disease prevention and so forth? And you'd think we'd have this solved by now, since we've been doing impactful things through nonprofits for years. But the real answer is that we measure them individually depending on exactly what the input is. So just to flip back and forth. So that deforestation, I'll just do the left side. Deforestation, energy, disease, and homelessness are measured by 300 hectares of trees, right? Number of hectares of trees, number of solar installations or power installations or something. Number of vaccines, number of beds, right? Highly specific numbers that are highly specific values that are specific to those impacts. Now, the next problem comes. That's all well and good. We can agree that those are reasonable ways to measure these impacts, but then the next problem comes in trying to argue or compare or do anything with these impacts. So which on the screen here are the largest impact, right? Just because it's 50,000 cook stoves on the top right doesn't mean that's a bigger impact than 100 solar panels, right? The units are important when comparing impact, and the numbers in front of them are often less important. And so we could sit here all day and argue about which one's larger. And the truth is, it's going to come down to our individual tastes. It's going to come down to whether or not we care more about trees or people or jobs or food or hunger or poverty or whatnot. And that's a problem, right? That's a hard thing to solve. It gets worse, though. So we have a third problem, which is, imagine yourself running a large nonprofit that does work in many of these areas, like, let's say, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Or let's say you're running a for-profit that's doing investments in impact, and you have investments across all these spaces doing all this impact. The big question then comes, what is the total impact of your portfolio? What is the total impact on this screen? And so far, the state of the art outside of what you're going to hear today is 300 hectares of trees, 100 solar installations, 1,000 vaccines, and so forth. It's an enumeration of all the individual impacts as opposed to adding them up into something meaningful. All right, well, I have this problem. So I run Fletch, and Fletch helps impactful startups. So we have 55 graduates. We've been running for 4 years. We have graduates in 16 countries, and all but 2 do different things. Right? We have 2 companies that do cook stoves, and every other company is different. And therefore, we have to add financial services to human waste, to clean fuels, to indoor pollution, to hunger, to poverty, to pollution, to deforestation, to volunteerism, and so forth. And so this is a problem that I've been living with for 4 years, and one that I was personally trying to not solve myself. This is a problem I was hoping to go to a conference and have someone tell me the answer, or have some consortium out there that had these answers tell me how to do this. And unfortunately, to date, that hasn't happened until I had this aha moment. But before that, let me explain what the state of the art is. Okay, so the first answer that I found out in the world is called social return on investment. And someone is not muted. Matt, can you take care of that, please? All right, so social return on investment. I saw this at a business plan competition, and I thought, great, nirvana, we got it solved. You just convert everything into dollars, and then you can add the dollars together. So we have, back from that example, 300 hectares of trees. Awesome. We have, let's say, the known price per board foot of tree. I live up here in Seattle. It's a logging area, and we know what a tree is worth, cut down, turned into lumber. Well, we don't know what a tree is worth in the ground, except for what it would be worth cutting it down, turned into lumber. So if you care about the trees and you don't want them cut down, that's not the right measure. We also know, let's say, the amount of CO2 in the tree. And so we can convert that into a dollar figure, because we know the price of CO2 on the California market and the European market and the Quebec market, and the price per CO2 in the British Columbia carbon tax. Unfortunately, those all differ by a factor of 20. So if we're going to sit around and try and figure out CO2, we're going to argue on what's the cost per ton of carbon by anywhere between 20 cents and $20. So that doesn't really help. And the same thing happens when we get further down and we're asking about vaccines. So what's 1,000 vaccines worth? Well, we know what a vaccine costs, but the reason why we give out vaccines is because they save more money than they cost. What's a life worth? Well, the way that the insurance companies work, a life is worth whatever that person could have earned. And so that's different whether they're in the United States or Ghana. And that seems a little wrong too. And so basically, when you get into the meat of social return on investment, you discover that you can't actually convert any of these into a dollar figure that any 2 people would agree on, and therefore it doesn't work. You get off by too many factors of 10, and it really doesn't work. So, throwing that aside, we'll move on to something that's bigger and brighter and talked about a whole lot more in the impact space, which is IRIS. So there's a group out there. It's called the Global Impact Investors Network, or as we call it, we just call it GIN. And they come up with a standard. It's about 3 years old now, and I guess it's 4 years old because it's on the 4th version. And then I don't remember what IRIS stands for, but it's their standard list of impactful measures. IRIS 4 just came out this year, and now it has 559 of these standard measures. And so in terms of trying to standardize, you can go through this catalog and pick out the measures that you think best fit your impacts. And there's an example on the right, which doesn't sound very impactful, right? So it's number of clients that you have. But at least in this case, the way I'm going to measure clients and the way you're going to measure clients are going to be a little closer than they would have if we had just picked it arbitrarily and made up our own measures. Because every single IRIS measure has a description, it has an ID, it has guidance, every single one kind of tells you how to use it. And so what you're supposed to do with the IRIS standard is go and pick 3 or 4 or 5 that fit your particular impact of your company. And so to move on to some that are a little more impactful than clients, I pulled up IRIS 4 and pasted some in here. So for instance, in the land conservation section, you can see standard PI 4907 says the area of land that has been reforested by the organization during the reporting period. Right, so that's an example of a great IRIS metric for reforestation. Now, Fletch doesn't do any reforestation, so we would skip that one and maybe go on to the next one. And so PI 5376 is the amount of greenhouse gas reductions due to products sold. And again, during the reporting period, and you can choose whatever reporting period you need here. Another one would be building area of energy efficiency improvements. So not what the energy efficiency improvements were, but the amount of square footage or square meterage of the buildings that had the energy efficient improvements to it. And then some of these IRIS metrics are just demonstrative or definitive, such as, how much fresh water was there under the control of the organization during this time period. So not what was done to the fresh water, but just how much was there, which is kind of like that other measure of how many clients you had. Same thing in this case. PI 1533 is just not even a number. It's just describe the disease that is being addressed. So if you're handing out those vaccines for, let's say, HIV, then the answer to this particular measure is HIV, and it doesn't change over time. And lastly, there's another one in here like that, which is OI 1618, which is your policy for threatened species. So you can imagine that any organization out there could have a threatened species policy. Most don't, but at least there would be a standardized number on what that would be on your IRIS metrics. All right, so as you can see through these, they vary from descriptive to numerative. And the key problem with the IRIS metrics is that you can't add any of them together. They don't convert into any common metric, and therefore they're not addable and they're not comparable. So how do you compare your threatened species policy to your disease condition addressed? Well, you don't. You're left back with that same bulleted list that we started with. So I'm not going to totally badmouth IRIS. It's a useful thing to do within a single organization if you're trying to get 3 or 4 or 5 or 559 measures of your impact. But it is pretty much useless to compare between organizations or to use to aggregate anything within a single organization. Okay, moving on, we get to GEARS. So GEARS is the Global Impact Investing Rating System created by B Labs, the same people who do certified B corporations. And I'll pause for a moment so you can read what they say. This is from their own website. All right, now on here you can see they are saying that it is a comprehensive and comparable rating system for impact. And then if you go into their FAQ, this is the first part of the answer to how does this measurement system compare to all others? And again, it says this is measuring how significant a company's current impact is. All right, so let's look at an example. So on the right here is the actual B impact report. So that's the GEARS rating for my company, for Fletch. Right? And you can see that we scored 111, and the median of all the companies that have ever taken the B impact assessment is 55. If you've ever done this assessment, it is about a 2-hour process to run through many, many questions. Every 2 years, those questions get updated. And you answer the questions. The questions are not so dissimilar from those IRIS questions. They will ask you how many square feet of office space do you have, and they will ask you whether or not you do an energy audit every year on that, and they'll ask you, do you recycle? And they'll also ask you governance questions like, Do you have a board of directors? And if so, what percentage of that board is outsiders and what percentage are women and minorities? And how much of your ownership is women and minorities? And they'll ask you about various policies and so forth. And so you answer all these questions, and each question has a score that is decided upon. The value of each question is decided upon by B Labs and their committee. And then those answers get all summed up. And if you get an 80 or above, then you can be a certified B corporation. You can pay the fee and be certified. If you get under 80, you're not a certified B corporation, but you'll still have a B impact report. And in terms of gears, in terms of the investing side of this, you can get a gears rating no matter what your number is. But those of us who use this for the corporation side know that 80 or above is kind of the threshold. And so where they had said in their description, go back here, it's a rigorous comparable system. No, it's on here. It's an objective comprehensive rating system. I want to just make it clear that it is somewhat objective, except that some small group of people in the world sat around and decided that giving to charity is worth 3 points and having a minority-owned business is 4 points. And doing recycling is 1 point, and so forth. And I'm making up those numbers. I'm not sure if those are the actual numbers. But they decided what the points were for each of those things that you could do. And so it's not exactly objective in that case. For instance, let's look at 3 companies. So here are the B impact assessments for Impact Hub Seattle, for Impact Hub Boulder, and Impact Hub Bay Area, which is San Francisco. So 3 companies that do exactly the same work in 3 different cities, all progressive cities, slightly different scale. So San Francisco has more people, Seattle has more square footage, Boulder is smaller than all 3. And you can see here at the bottom that Seattle had a score of 100, Boulder had a score of 87, and San Francisco had a score of 86. And what's fascinating about it here, they said it was comparable. And so according to the way the gears would talk about this, Impact Hub Seattle is more impactful. But how much more impactful? It's 14 more impactful, but 14 what? It's not 14% more impactful. It's not 7%, given the score goes to 200. And how is Boulder? Well, I can't tell you. I've been to both. I work out of Seattle. I can't tell you how Seattle is more impactful than San Francisco. Something in here, right? The worker side of San Francisco is higher. The community side of Seattle is higher. We'd have to go and look at the actual details to figure out why the scores came out higher for Seattle. It's surprising that Boulder came out higher than San Francisco, given that it has a smaller number of companies that are members, individuals and companies that are members. It's a smaller square footage than San Francisco. It's a smaller everything than San Francisco, but it's 1 more than San Francisco on this measure. And so that's odd and surprising. And really the conclusion that I have seeing these 3 and seeing 1,500 other measures is that this is a really good measure for a single company. It tells you whether or not you have met a reasonable criteria for being an impactful company, but it doesn't give you a number that's comparable to any other company. So what you can do is look at how your company did, and 2 years later, when you get recertified and you run through this again, you can see whether or not you've done anything new, whether you've tried to be a better company. And you can keep trying to be a better company because there's always something you haven't done in this system. And so in the end, Gears is really good at driving internal impacts inside an organization, but it is of no use in comparing or aggregating impact, which is frustrating. So so far 3 down, and those are really the only 3 that are out there that are well known and well regarded. All right, so the aha moment. So I was standing, again, I was talking to Gifford Pinchot, and we were talking about something that he's been working on for years, which is how to measure happiness. And I had this aha, seriously, just this one flash of insight that said, oh, we're looking at it too small. And then in the next second, I realized, oh, this same idea would work for measuring impact. And so here it is. We worry about whether one solar panel or one vaccine is bigger than the other, when really what we should be looking at is orders of magnitude. And so orders of magnitude is multiples of 10. So one solar panel is nice, all right? I have some solar panels on my roof. In fact, I think I have 16. All right, 16 is not as good as 20, but it's better than none, right? 1,000 solar panels is way better than 1 or 16 or 20, but it's still not really solving the problem, right? What we really need, the reason we're putting solar panels on our roofs is because we want 100% renewable energy. And if we got 100% renewable energy for an entire country, that would be a whole lot more than 1,000 panels or 10,000 panels or 100,000 panels. That'd be a lot of panels. But in reality, we don't even want the renewable energy just for one country. What we want is renewable energy everywhere. That is the goal. And everywhere is a big place. The world is rather large. There's 7 billion people. And so the size of these solutions are not, the size of these solutions are huge, right? The scale of impact between one solar panel and everywhere in the entire world being on renewable energy, whether it's solar or otherwise, is orders and orders of magnitude, right? And so these are not numbers. We use orders of magnitude here and there in our everyday life, but more often we use a linear scale. We're used to counting by ones, 1, 2, 4, 10, and so forth. Orders of magnitude, you multiply each level by 10. So level 1 is 10, level 2 is 100, 1,000, 10,000. English has names for all these. I had to look up the name for the 10th or the 12th level. So that's the last one there is billions, 10 billion, right? And then you get to 100 billion, trillion, and so forth. We don't have a good intuition for what these logarithmic scales look like. So I'm going to show you one. So if you see that tiny little square at the bottom, we'll think of that as level 1, right? And so if that is level 1, level 2 is the next square out, and level 3 is the next square out. And so level 4 is this square that's about half the screen, a little less than half the screen. If we then continue that out, I can't show it to you because it doesn't fit on the screen. We get to the 7th level of this growth, and we would now have a square that reached from here across the city of Seattle. And I don't live in Seattle. I live across the ocean from Seattle. And then if we got to the 10th level growing this, we would have a square that the Earth would fit into. And that's just in 10 levels. And that's not an order of magnitude scale that's 10 times bigger each time, because that didn't fit on the screen to start with. That's only a scale that goes 5 times. So if we had that first little tiny square as level 1, the second square would be the next square out, and the next one would be the size of the screen, and the 10th level would reach almost to the moon. These scales grow fast. We call these logarithmic scales. That's the title of the slide. And the word logarithm, it's a math term. It scares people. All it means is how many times did you multiply by 10? Right. So to get to 10, we didn't multiply it. Well, we multiplied once. We started with 1. We multiplied by 10. That's 1. Multiply 10 by 10. Again, you get to 100. That's just a logarithm of 2. And then 3, and then 4 is so forth. And you've seen this before. You were taught, or you know scientific notation. This is when we say that the number is 5 times 10 to the 4th. Right? And you can forget the first time and just focus on 10 to the 4th. What does that mean? That means multiply 10 by itself 4 times. That's the number 10,000. Right? So you can think of it as the logarithm is just the exponent on the 10 in scientific notation. Okay, so finally, I'm going to tell you what the Pinchot Impact Index is. Right? It is taking every potential impact and rating it on a scale of 0 through 10 to the 21st. And again, I don't even remember what we call that in English, but that is a 1 with 21 zeros after it. It's a very large number. Right? So that's the range of impacts but that's too unwieldy to deal with because it's too many numbers. They get too big. So we're just going to use we're not even going to use the logarithm of that. We're going to use 1/3 of the logarithm of that, which gives us a scale from 0 to 7. So level 7 would be 10 to the 7th times 3, or 10 to the 21st in terms of units. Right, so every time you scale it up, we're not growing by a factor of 5, and we're not growing by a factor of 10. Every level in the Pinchot Impact Index grows by a factor of 1,000, right? 3 orders of magnitude. So it grows really fast. And we're gonna write down the impacts in this form. It's a form where it looks like an exponent, so it looks like scientific notation with the value above a p for Pinchot. All right, so let me describe to you what these levels look like. So P0 is nothing, right? P0 is you haven't done any positive change in the world. You haven't done anything. P1 would be a small positive change. So you've put in 100 solar panels, or 1,000 vaccines, or 300 hectares of trees, or so forth. So you've done something to improve the world, but not a lot. That would be a P1. A P2 is that you've made a systemic change to the world. So you have found a way to get a solar panel on every house, right? And you're on your way to do it. And I'll describe how to measure what you've achieved in a little bit. And we're going to put in some things that are big systemic changes on here, or seemingly big, like homelessness. If you could solve homelessness in the United States, that would be a P2 on this scale. And so I just want to point that out. If that's a P2, then pretty much everything else we do in the world is a P1. Right? If you can bring democracy to a country, that's a P2. So you can see the scale's kind of compressed, because when we get to P3, we've solved world hunger. We have a cure for every major disease, right? We're running on 100% renewable energy everywhere on the globe. We're doing things like Brexit everywhere instead of picking up guns to move our borders. That's a P3 on this scale, which leaves P4 to be solving bigger problems. Bigger problems like global poverty is history. Everyone has enough money to live, has enough money to eat, has enough money to have clothing on their back. Everything that can be recycled is recycled, and so we have mostly a cradle-to-cradle economy, and we're no longer taking away the ecosystem. Right? There's more to this, and the book, which I'll point to later, gives you lots more examples in here. But we're not done yet, because we're just at 4. If we go to P5, we get peace on Earth. Right? So you can walk anywhere on the planet and feel safe because no one hurts anyone else. That's a P5. Universal freedom for everyone. Right? A fully, not just everything's recyclable, but we are no longer consuming anything. Everything that we use is reusable and sustainable. Which leaves P6. P6 is what I call a good day on Star Trek. So you need anything, you walk up over to the wall, to the replicator, you ask for it. Any material need you have for free. There's no disease. And everything else below this is true as well. So basically you have a really good day every day, which is strange because we have one more level. And the last level is that everyone lives in a state of nirvana and enlightenment, right? So just because you can have anything from the wall doesn't mean you treat everyone as well as you could, and in P7 you do. Right? So that's our utopia from 1 to 7. As you can see, that's a pretty big difference between levels. And it sounds a little crazy, but just bear with me for a moment. So how do you measure? Well, you look at what your impact is doing. You look at your organization and you say, well, we're doing solar installations. We're not doing them everywhere, and so that would be a P1. Or we're handing out vaccines. We're not going to solve and get rid of this disease, but we're making people's lives better. That's a P1. We are not solving homelessness, but we're helping. That's a P1. Now, basically, if you're doing anything and you're not solving the problem at a national scale, it's a P1. Or a systemic change that could be implemented everywhere, that's a P1. Right? And if you're doing something bigger, which I've seen things that are bigger, then it might be a P2, and it's unlikely to be more. All right. Once you agree to that, well, then comparisons become trivial. So almost everything's a P1. You just compare the number. P1 is equal to P1. P2 is equal to P2. A P2 is bigger than a P1. And so comparisons become absolutely trivial. And aggregation becomes really easy, right? It will sound a little hard the first time you see it, but it becomes rather easy. So you take your level. So remember, each level is 1,000 units, or 1,000 times more units than the previous level. So a P1 is 1,000 units, and a P2 is 1,000,000 units, and a P3 is 1,000,000,000 units. So you convert back to units, you add them all together, you take 1/3 of the logarithm, and you put it next to the P, and you're done. So I'll give you an example. Oh, and Excel will do this for you. So you put in the sum, and you use the formula log, and it will produce the logarithm you can divide by 3. Or in fact, Excel will let you do the log in one step, the log based 1,000. So you just do comma 1,000, and it'll compute it for you. So here's an example. If we add 3 P1s together, so that's 1,000 units each, that's 3,000 total. And the logarithm of 3,000 is 3.47, and 1/3 of that is 1.16. Right, and again, a log of 3,000 comma 1,000 in Excel will give you the 1.16 in one shot. And so great, now we know that if we do 3 small things, we get something that's slightly bigger, which makes logical sense, right? So we had, each one was P1.0, you add 3 of them together, you get 1.16, you're slightly more, right? You don't, just to be clear, adding 3 P1s does not give you a P3, nothing close to a P3. All right, and if we stop there, that would be interesting, but the scale goes the other direction too. So there's bad things in the world. There's damage to the world. There's the anti-impacts, and we can measure those too, and we'll do that really quickly here. So -1p are all the solutions that are less bad solutions. Right? Driving your Prius is still harming the environment because you're still burning gasoline, but you're burning a lot less, right? And picking paper over plastic bags, or just using a renewable bag, is better, right? Natural gas replacing coal is better, but they're not positive actions. They're just less bad actions. So those are -1s. And -2 would be systemic damage, like the oil industry, and then we can keep going. Like, World War III with nuclear weapons would be a -4. A global pandemic that wiped out, 1 billion or 5 billion people would be a -5. End of all humanity would be -6, or end of all life would also be -6. Destruction of the earth would be -6. And then -7 is kind of the opposite of nirvana, which is the end of everything. And so we have a scale that's kind of symmetric on goodness and badness from +7 to -7. And what that lets you do is compute your net impact. So if you're an organization and you're doing things like using Priuses as your transport, and we'll just stick with solar panels on the other end, and installing solar panels, well, you can compute the net impact of your business. You can take some -1s and add them to some +1s and see where you land. Or in this example, adding 2 +1s to a -2. The positive ones are 1,000 apiece. The -2 is -1 million. -1 million. Oops, there's a typo on there. It should be -2p is -1 million. When you add those together, you get -998,000. You take the log. You have to take the negative of the log because logs don't do negatives. And you get 1/3 of that is -1.99. So you can see you've offset your -2p by just a wee bit. And so you're slightly less negative, right? Which again makes intuitive sense. All right, so now you know how to do the math, and now you know what the index is. And one more thing that came out of fleshing out the standard was the idea that there's a difference in measuring what this idea could do. So if I'm installing solar panels, if I've solved that problem of making it easy to put solar panels on the roof, making it financially feasible, then they could be installed everywhere. That's the potential impact of that idea. Now, my company may not have the means to go do it everywhere globally. And in most cases, in most companies, in most organizations, you don't have the money or the manpower to do that, but you have an intended impact that your organization wants to do. And so it may be solar panels for one city, or it may be solar panels for one country. Excuse me. And then there's a separate measure, which is how much has your company actually achieved? And these are three different measures. These are three different levels of impact that you can look at for your company or a group of companies. And so again, the potential impact is equivalent in the entrepreneurial world of total addressable market. So if you are feeding the homeless or feeding the hungry, well, then ending hunger on the global scale is a P3. If you've come up with an idea on how you can do this better, faster, cheaper, then the potential is a P3. Right? Your intention might be to do this in the whole continent of Africa. Well, that would be one scale smaller. That's not the whole globe, and so that might be a P2. But you've achieved something much smaller than that. Maybe you've brought food to one village, and so in comparison to Africa, one village is really small. One village is less than 1% of the continent. Right, so when you're doing achieved impact in here, so when you do potential and intended, you just stick with the scales and pick P1, P2, P3, and so forth, big whole numbers. When you want to compute your achieved impact, you have one more factor to put into the equation, which is one of these 5 choices. And so I'm in the Pinchot Impact Index, you can't say you've done 25% of your impact, or 37, or 2, or 5. You can only say that you've done 0.01% of your intended impact, or 1%, 10%, 50%, or you're all done. Those are your only choices. And so what you do is, go back. What you do is you just take the unit value and you multiply by that factor to shrink it down, and then you take the logarithm, and that'll give you your p-value for your actual achieved impact of your organization. All right, and then once you've done that, once you understand how to do that, and then there's a book that can walk you through the rest of the details, then it becomes rather easy to add the achieved impact, to sum up all the impacts across your portfolio or your consortium or your large nonprofit, whatever group of impacts you have, you can add them together and you can come up with a value. And so example at the bottom is a P 0.33 plus a 0.67 plus a 0.9. You do the logarithmic math in the same way I showed you before. You turn those back into units. You add them together. You turn that back into a logarithm, and you get the answer. And so I have done this, right? To come full circle, I have 55 fledglings in the portfolio at Fletch, and they vary in what they do. Right? Again, all but 2 do different things, but I have numbers for it now. And so of these 55 companies, 55 standalone companies, the potential impact of all of them combined is just slightly more than a P3. It's slightly more than a P3 because one of them is a P3, right? The potential impact. Their intention is a lot smaller. None of them have an intention above a P1, right? And so when you add up 55 P1s, you get 1.563. And it's not actually 50, I think it's 49 at this point because 6 of the fledglings are no longer in business. And what have they achieved to date? Well, 55 companies combined have achieved a P 0.623. So here we go. We have a number that we can point to and say this is the impact of the portfolio. The only downside of having a number is that you don't know what it means, right? If you just have this one number, it is comparable to another portfolio that is about 50 companies. Right? It should be bigger than a portfolio that has 20 companies because there's more impact happening in it. But what's more interesting is that you have a number that's trendable, that you can look over time. And so there's a blog post on the Fletch website that talks about this particular graph. So here what we're looking at is every 6 months over the past 4.5 years, and what was the impact of the portfolio at that point in time. So the numbers along the bottom are the session numbers of Fletch. We did 6 once every 6 months, and then we did an experimental one, that's the X. And then we just finished session 7 in June of 2016, this year. And as you can see, the lines are not totally smooth because the companies increased their achieved impact, especially the green line. They increased their achieved impact over time, and every once in a while, one of them declares themselves dead, and so the number goes down again. In the intended impact, it tends to go up, but if you look at it in great detail, you can see again, it drops a little bit here and there where they die off. And the potential one has that big jump in it from 4 to 5 because we brought in a company called Evernew. They make cotton recyclable. And so for the first time in human history, clothing is not a one-time and throw-it-away product. It's suddenly a recyclable product. That has a potentially huge impact in the world, and that's the P3 that's in there. All right, and finally in this index, really, the one pushback I get is that everything's a P1. That we've gotten rid of arguing over whether solar panels are more important than vaccines, more important than hunger, and so forth. And that's true. That is a decent pushback on here. Except what you see when you start using this is that you start getting tired of seeing P1s and you start getting inspired to do something bigger. And the world is full of big problems, right? There are, in fact, world problems listed up through P5, right, and P6 even. But P5 is still talking about problems that we need to solve in the world. And so by having an index that is so focused on the small, tiny little numbers, it does, in fact, inspire entrepreneurs to think about bigger things. The details of this index are listed and described in a book. This is the cover of the book. It's called the Pinchot Impact Index. You can see a little bit more details at pinchotimpact.org. You will find the book exclusively on Amazon. It's a quick read. It's 100 pages, and it'll give you the rest of the details on how to do the math. All right, before I ask questions, I'll finish off by telling you that today's webinar and the whole webinar series is brought to you by Fletch, the Conscious Company Accelerator. We take impactful companies, impactful entrepreneurs from around the world. We invest $20,000 in each of our invitees. We bring them to Seattle for 2 months. We flood them with mentors, and we help make them better companies. And then we support them afterwards because we own a little bit of each one. It's also brought to you by Aviary, which is an impact seed fund that funds the best and brightest of those Fletch graduates and graduates of other accelerator programs that work with impactful companies. Find details about Aviary at aviary.vc. This is the second of the webinar series. You can find a recording of the first one at fledge.co/webinars or aviary.vc/webinars. Next week, we're going to talk about how philanthropy doesn't scale and how the only solutions to poverty, hunger, and the big issues of the world are through for-profits. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to stick on this philanthropy kick just for 2 weeks. And we're going to talk about the investing side. So how philanthropy is truly on the same landscape as Wall Street investing. How philanthropy is truly another form of investing, and how everything in between is impact investing. And I'll walk you through a landscape analysis on how that works.